It all began. The night was heavy with rain, the kind that blurs the edges of everything. The street lights shimmered on wet pavement, and the world smelled of thunder and quiet despair inside my small wooden house. The clock ticked slow, as if time itself had grown tired. James had said he would be home late again. A client, he said, but I had stopped asking which client because the answer was always work. I washed the dishes one by one and tried to ignore the way the wind pushed against the windows, like someone wanting to come in. When the power flickered, the house sighed into darkness, and I stood still listening to the heartbeat in my ears. Then the lights returned, weak and pale. I almost missed the sound. At first it was soft, just a whimper, a breath breaking through the storm. I opened the front door, and the wind rushed in, bringing with it the scent of rain and something else, something small and alive. There on the doorstep sat a basket woven from straw, its edges dripping water. I bent down, my knees sinking into the wet wood, and saw a movement beneath a thin blue blanket, a tiny hand curling like the petal of a dying flower. I whispered hello, because I did not know what else to say. The baby stirred, eyes closed, lips trembling as if caught between dreams. I lifted him into my arms and felt warmth so fragile it made my chest ache. Pinned to the blanket was a piece of paper soaked at the edges, but the ink still clear. 3 words written in a hurried, shaking hand. His yours. The rain tried to wash them away, but they stayed etched into my mind. I looked up and down the street, searching for headlights, for footsteps, for any proof that this was a mistake, but the night gave me nothing, only silence. I carried the child inside, locked the door twice, and leaned against it, breathing hard. The baby made a small sound, half a cry, half a sigh. I set him on the couch, and the blanket slipped enough for me to see a faint crescent mark on his wrist. I thought it was dirt at first, but no, it was a scar, pale against the soft skin. I went to the window, pulling the curtain just enough to see the road. It was empty. The only movement was the reflection of lightning across puddles. It felt like the whole world had gone still, waiting for me to make the next move. I turned back and saw the note again on the table, and beside it a small wooden bird, carved rough but delicate, wings spread as if frozen in flight. My hand shook when I touched it, because somewhere in the back of my memory that shape felt familiar. I had seen it before, years ago, maybe in the drawer of the old crib that had stood in this very house once upon a time, before the silence took over, before James stopped smiling, before I stopped trying. The phone rang, then slicing through the quiet, I ran to it, heart hammering, but when I answered there was only static, a whisper that could have been a breath or maybe just the rain in the line, then the click of disconnection. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the receiver, wondering if whoever left the baby had called just to make sure I found him. Headlights flashed through the curtain, and my stomach tightened. James was home. I gathered the baby close, and when he stepped into the doorway dripping from the storm, he froze. His eyes went from me to the bundle in my arms to the note on the table. The air between us grew sharp. Eleana, what is this? His voice low, his face unreadable. I told him everything from the knockless night to the sound that had pulled me outside. He listened, not interrupting, but the way his fingers clenched the umbrella made my skin crawl. When I finished, he walked to the table, picked up the note, read it once, then again, his jaw tight. Who would write this? He said. Maybe it's a prank. But his voice cracked on the word prank, and I saw it there, a flicker of recognition. He knew something. I stepped closer, asked James, do you know whose child this is? He turned away, said, we will call the police in the morning. For now, keep him warm. I wanted to believe him, yet every instinct screamed that the morning might bring more than answers. It might bring truth. I wasn't ready for the baby started crying, then a sharp, desperate sound that filled every corner of the room. James flinched like the noise hurt him. I rocked the baby, whispered, hush, little one, you are safe, though I wasn't sure it was true. When I looked up, James had gone upstairs, the door closing softly, the sound of his steps fading. I stayed awake through the long hours until dawn, the baby sleeping against my chest, his breath small and steady. I could feel the pulse of life beneath his skin, fragile yet stubborn. The note lay on the table, curling as it dried, the words still dark, still claiming me. Just before sunrise, I saw the mark on his wrist again, the crescent moon shape, faint but real, and my stomach dropped because I remembered that same scar on my own skin, hidden beneath the bracelet I had worn since I was a girl, a scar from an accident James said I'd had before we met, one I never fully remembered. I held the baby closer, looked toward the staircase where James still slept, and whispered to the quiet room, who are you, little one, and why did you come to me? The wind answered through the cracks of the old house, whispering something that sounded like truth waiting to be found. The secret in the cradle. The morning crept into the house like a stranger, uninvited and uncertain. The rain had stopped, but the air was still heavy with what it had left behind. I had not slept. The baby lay beside me, wrapped in the blue blanket, his breathing slow, steady, almost too calm. The note rested on the table, the words already burned into my mind, his yours. James came down the stairs, his tie half done, his eyes hollow. He looked at the baby, then at me, as if trying to remember who we were to each other. He said he would go to the police station, but his voice had no weight. It was only sound, pretending to mean something. I asked if he had slept. He said yes, but his eyes said otherwise. When he left, the silence that followed felt thicker than the storm. Before I walked to the window and watched his car until it turned the corner and vanished, the house seemed to exhale. Then I heard a sound, soft scratching like paper moving on its own. It came from the basket where the baby had been. I looked inside, the blanket still damp, and under it, hidden in the seam, was another slip of paper folded tight. The edges were torn as if ripped from a notebook, the writing faint, almost erased. But I could still read it. "You promised just that, nothing more." My hands trembled and the air turned colder because that handwriting was familiar. I had seen it on old birthday cards on the corner of grocery lists. It was James's. I stared at the baby, his tiny hand curled near his face, the same crescent scar glowing faintly under the new light, and my mind ran wild with questions, none of which I was ready to answer. I placed the new note beside the first and felt something in me start to unravel. Around noon, someone knocked. I opened the door expecting maybe James, maybe a neighbor. But it was Mrs. Granger from next door. She smiled the way people do when they know more than they say. She asked if everything was all right, said she heard crying last night. I told her a story half true, that a friend had left the baby. For a while she looked at me with those sharp old eyes and said, "I thought you couldn't have children, dear." The words stung, but I only nodded. She touched my arm gently and whispered, "Sometimes things return when we least expect them." Then she left, her footsteps fading into the quiet street. I spent the rest of the day trying to understand the pieces that didn't fit James's strange calm, the familiar toy, the note that carried his hand, the mark that mirrored my own. By evening the shadows had grown long, and I felt the house closing in like it wanted to hear what I would discover next. When James returned, he avoided my eyes, went straight to the baby, asked if he had eaten, asked if he had cried, asked nothing about the note. I asked if he went to the police. He said they would look into it, but his tone said he hadn't gone anywhere. He looked exhausted and yet restless, like a man who had built his life on secrets that were beginning to crack. I told him about the second note, about the words "you promised." He froze just a heartbeat and then said, "You must be mistaken, Eleana. That isn't my writing." But the tremor in his hand betrayed him. I said nothing, because silence sometimes speaks louder than any question. Night came again, thunder murmuring far away. The baby wouldn't sleep, so I rocked him, humming a tune I didn't remember learning. James sat in the chair staring at the wall, the wooden bird from the basket in his hand, turning it over and over like it was an answer he could feel but not speak. I asked him where it came from. He said his father used to carve things like that long ago, before he left us. Then he dropped the bird back into the basket and went upstairs without another word. I waited until I heard the creak of our bedroom door closing. Then I took the bird again. Something rattled inside it. I shook it once and a small piece of folded paper slid out. I opened it carefully. Inside were two words written faintly, almost invisible: "Not again." The letters looked older, faded, like they had been written years before. I looked at the baby sleeping, his tiny fist pressed against the blue blanket, and a chill moved through me. This wasn't random. It wasn't chance. The storm had carried back something buried in our past, something James had sworn would never return. I walked to the mirror, the one that hung in the hallway, the one James had always hated, and I looked at the scar on my wrist, the crescent moon mark that matched the baby's, and suddenly flashes came quick like lightning. A hospital room years ago, the smell of antiseptic, the sound of a newborn cry, then darkness, and James's voice saying, "Forget it, please forget it." I touched the glass, whispering, "Who did I forget and why?" But the mirror gave no answer, only my reflection holding a truth I didn't yet understand. The clock struck midnight, and the baby stirred again, his eyes opening wide, deep pools that seemed to know too much. I whispered, "It's all right, little one, you are safe." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure if it was true. Outside, the wind began to rise, carrying with it the scent of the sea. Though we lived miles from the shore, I walked to the door, opened it just enough to breathe the night, and for a heartbeat I thought I saw a figure at the end of the street watching, then gone as if the dark itself had swallowed them. When I closed the door, the baby had stopped crying, completely staring at the ceiling with calm beyond his age, and in that stillness I realized something I hadn't before. The house was never empty, not anymore, and the promise written in that note was not just James's, it was mine too. The shadow who knew our names. The rain had returned, soft and secret, against the windows. The baby slept beside the fire, the glow painting his cheeks with light that felt too old for his tiny face. James had left before sunrise, said he needed it, said he had work. Though it was Sunday, I watched him drive away, and the emptiness he left behind felt heavier than silence. I picked up the wooden bird again, the one that had fallen open last night, the paper inside still folded, now brittle in my palm. The words "not again" pressed deep into my thoughts like a warning carved into bone. I could not forget. I kept hearing them as I moved through the house, every step whispering, "Not again, not again." By afternoon, I found myself in the attic, a place James never wanted me to enter. Dust clung to the air like memory boxes stacked high, old photographs curling at the edges, and in the corner a trunk I didn't recognize. I knelt beside it, my hand shaking as I opened it. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to James, each signed with the same name, Evelyn. The name hit me like a dream I once had and forgot too soon. I read the first letter dated 1989, just before our wedding. The words were tender, desperate, full of love and regret. She wrote about a child she could not keep, about a promise he had made to protect what was left of them. She said she would find him again one day when the time was right. I dropped the letter, my heart pounding. The baby stirred below as if hearing her name through the floorboards. I whispered, "Evelyn, who are you?" But deep down I already knew she was the woman who came before me, the woman James never mentioned, the woman who had his past in her hands. When James came home, I hid the letters. He looked tired, his clothes damp, his eyes darker than morning. I asked him where he had gone. He said nowhere. I told him I went through the attic. He froze, his jaw tightening, but he said nothing. At dinner, I watched him closely. He couldn't meet my gaze, his fork untouched, his mind somewhere I couldn't follow. Finally, I asked about Evelyn. His hand stopped mid-do, his voice low and rough. He said she was a friend from long ago, nothing more, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. That night, I woke to footsteps outside the baby's room, slow, careful, moving closer. I opened the door and found no one, but the window was open, the curtains swaying, and a faint scent of rose and rain filled the room. On the floor lay a photograph, the edges torn. It showed James holding a baby, not ours, not the one sleeping here, but another child, the same eyes, the same mark on the wrist. I carried the photo to the kitchen, my hands trembling, the world spinning. I needed truth, no matter how much it hurt. When James came down, he saw the photo and went pale, like all color had drained from him. I asked whose child it was. He whispered a name, Evelyn, again, and then he said the baby died years ago. I asked if he was sure, if he had seen it. He didn't answer. He only said some things are better left buried, but his voice cracked like a man holding back the past with broken hands. I looked at the baby asleep in my arms, and the truth began to form like fog taking shape. If Evelyn's child was gone, who was this? If the handwriting on the note was James's and the scar matched mine, then what promise had been broken? What life had been traded for this new one? Later that night, as James slept, I crept to the porch. The rain had stopped, but the street was wet, glistening under the moonlight, and at the gate stood a woman, her face hidden by a scarf. She whispered softly, almost singing, "Eleana, don't be afraid." I froze. She knew my name. Her voice carried something strange, something familiar. She said, "He's not who you think he is, and neither are you," before vanishing into the fog as if she had never been there. I stood there shaking, holding the baby close, whispering, "Who am I? Tell me what you mean." But the only answer was the sound of waves in the distance, though no sea was near. When I went back inside, the baby was awake, his eyes locked on mine, calm and knowing. He reached his tiny hand toward my face, touching my cheek gently, and for a moment I felt warmth rush through me like a memory not mine. But his eyes saw flashes of hospital white lights, a woman crying, my own face among them, but older and broken. I gasped, and the vision vanished, leaving me breathless. James came down, asked if I was all right. I told him someone was outside. He searched the yard, but found nothing. He said maybe I was dreaming, maybe the storm was playing tricks. But I knew what I saw, and I knew the woman's voice was real. The next morning, the letters from the attic were gone, every one of them, the trunk empty, as if it had never held anything at all. James said he hadn't touched them, but the fear in his eyes betrayed his lie. Now I sit by the cradle, writing down everything before it fades, because truth is like fog, it slips through your fingers if you don't hold it tight. And I think the storm that started that night isn't over, it's only just beginning. And somewhere in the distance, I can still hear that voice whispering, "Not again." The promise buried beneath our names. The night grew heavy again, the wind pressing against the windows as if the world wanted, and I sat beside the cradle, the candle trembling, the flame thin as breath. The baby stirred, his tiny fingers curling like he was dreaming of holding something that had already been lost. I whispered to him softly, though I did not know what to say, only that the silence was worse than fear. James had gone to town, or so he said. I waited hours listening to the house creak like old wood, remembering what the woman had whispered, that he was not who I thought he was, and that I was not myself. I wanted to laugh, but the sound died in my throat because part of me already believed it. When the clock reached midnight, a knock came, slow, measured, deliberate. 3 times I opened the door, half expecting fog. But there stood an old man, his coat soaked, his eyes kind but haunted. He said he once worked at St. Mary's Hospital back in '92 and asked if I was Eleana Harper. When I nodded, he said I had asked once about a child I had lost. I told him he was mistaken. I had never been to that hospital. I had no child before this baby, but his gaze stayed steady. He said my name was written on a file sealed under another patient's record, Evelyn Marsh. He said both names on the same form, one marked mother, one marked guardian. My knees weakened. I asked him why he was telling me this. He said because the file was reopened last week by someone calling himself James Harper. Before I could ask more, he pressed a key into my hand, told me to keep it safe, said it opened the past, and left, disappearing into the storm as if swallowed by it. I closed the door, shaking the key cold against my skin. I waited for James, but he never came home until dawn, his shirt torn, a bruise near his collarbone. I asked what happened. He said nothing important. I asked where he went. He said nowhere that mattered. I showed him the key. He froze, then smiled thinly, said it looked old, useless, maybe for a lock that no longer existed. But his hands betrayed him, trembling slightly, before he took the baby into his arms and turned away. Later, while he slept, I searched the house, found a small chest beneath the floorboard under our bed, the lock old and rusted, the key fit perfectly inside, and when it turned the sound echoed through me. Inside were photographs of birth certificate torn in half, hospital bracelets, one with the name Evelyn Marsh, the other Eleana Harper, same date, same time, same baby. My breath caught. I felt the world tilt. I saw my name twice, one written in black ink, the other in blue, as if two people had tried to claim the same life. I remembered flashes of white corridors, crying voices, a hand pulling me away. I had thought it was a dream, but it was memory hidden deep behind years of pretending. When I confronted James, he stared at me for a long moment and said, "You were never supposed to know." He told me Evelyn was my sister, that she could not keep her child, that she begged us to raise him as our own, that the hospital made a mistake writing both names. But his eyes were wet when he said it, and his voice trembled like a man burying truth beneath softer lies. He said the baby had died later that year, that I had lost myself in grief, that we left town to start again, but now the child had returned, because some promises do not stay buried. I wanted to believe him, but my heart said no, this child was alive because someone had chosen for him to live. That night I dreamt of Evelyn standing at the edge of water, calling my name, her hair wet, her eyes bright with sorrow. She said, "You broke your promise, Eleana. You left him there, and now he will make you remember." Then the water rose around her, and I woke screaming, the baby crying in my arms, James nowhere in sight. I found him outside, digging near the old willow, the earth dark and soft. I asked what he was doing. He said he was planting roots for our future, but the hole looked like a grave. He said it was for the past. I wanted to run, but my feet stayed still, my heart beating too loud. He dropped something small into the soil, a photograph, maybe a locket, then covered it again before walking away. After he left, I knelt beside the spot, brushed away the dirt, and found not a locket, but a bracelet, tiny white plastic, the kind hospitals give to newborns, and printed on it the same name again, Evelyn Marsh, and under it in faded ink, Eleana Harper. The world spun around me. I held the bracelet close and whispered, "Who am I? What have I done?" The wind answered with its hollow cry, and somewhere in the house the baby began to laugh, not cry, laugh, like he knew something beautiful and terrible all at once. I carried him to the mirror. His reflection shimmered strange for a heartbeat, and I saw two women standing behind me, both wearing my face, one smiling, one weeping. Then they were gone. The candle flickered and the glass cracked down the center. Now I sit writing again, the bracelet beside me, the key on the table, the baby asleep in my arms, and I wonder if truth is a mercy or a curse, if love can survive the weight of secrets that refuse to stay buried. And as the wind rises outside, whispering names I cannot forget, I know part 4 is not the end, only the door opening wider into what waits beneath our names. The mirror of lies. The house felt different after the storm, like the air itself had been rearranged. The baby slept lighter than before, his dreams restless. I could see his eyelids move as if he watched things no child should see. I sat near the cracked mirror, the one that had split in two when I looked inside it the night before, and I thought about what it had shown, two faces wearing mine, one smiling, one crying, both whispering the same name, Evelyn. James had left again. Ailey said he was going to the store, but he took the car keys and the shotgun, and the look in his eyes was not the look of a man buying bread, it was the look of a man preparing for something he could not speak aloud. I wanted to follow, but fear held me still. I touched the mirror, and it shivered beneath my fingers. Though there was no wind, I saw a hallway reflected that was not ours, long white lights humming faintly, a hospital corridor, St. Mary's maybe, and a woman walking down it carrying a bundle wrapped in blue, the same bracelet around her wrist, Evelyn Marsh, printed in faded ink. I reached closer, and the air grew cold, the reflection breathing like it was alive. I could smell antiseptic, hear a baby cry, then my own name, whispered from nowhere. I fell back, the mirror went dark, and in that silence I heard the baby upstairs whimper like he felt the same chill. I ran to him, lifted him from the cradle, and the moment my hand touched his skin, the room filled with faint whispers, not words, only the sound of grief repeating itself over and over like the sea hitting stone. There was a knock on the back door, soft, almost polite. I froze, the baby pressed to my chest. When I opened it, no one stood there, but an envelope lay on the step, no name on it, just the same handwriting as the first note. I opened it with shaking fingers. Inside was a photograph of James standing beside Evelyn, their hands linked, the baby between them, both smiling, and behind them St. Mary's Hospital sign, clear as daylight. Written on the back was a single sentence: he was never meant to die. My stomach turned, the world spinning. I wanted to scream, but the sound never came, only tears. I did not remember deciding to cry. I just found myself doing it like the body remembered pain before the mind did. I stared at the photo again, the baby's crescent mark gleaming under the sun that had shone years ago, and I understood that the grave James had spoken of might have been dug for someone else. Footsteps behind me made me turn. James stood there, pale, soaked from rain. Though it had not rained since dawn, he saw the photo in my hand, his face emptied of color. I asked him what it meant. He said nothing for a long time, then whispered it was all supposed to end long ago, and walked past me into the kitchen, his movements slow, heavy, like every step cost him a piece of himself. I followed, asked him whose grave he had buried near the willow. He said nothing still, so I shouted whose grave, and he looked up, eyes red, and said ours. The baby began to cry again, sharp and sudden, like glass breaking. The mirror upstairs answered with a faint hum, and I felt something shift in the air, the smell of roses and earth, the taste of metal on my tongue. I ran back up the stairs, the mirror glowing faintly gold. Within the crack between its halves, I saw something move, a shadow shaped like a woman holding out her arms. I reached for her, and for one heartbeat I felt warmth and the sound of someone say my name softly, not Eleana, not Evelyn, but something between the two. Then the light went out, the mirror went cold, the baby stopped crying, and downstairs I heard James calling my name, voice cracked, desperate, like he had lost me before and feared it was happening again. When I went back down the stairs, James stood by the table, his hands shaking, the photo gone, the envelope burning slowly in the sink. He said, "It is over, Eleana, let it burn, let it all burn." I told him truth does not burn, it only waits. He turned toward me, eyes hollow, said, "If you open that mirror again, we will both disappear." But I could not stop. The mirror cold like a heartbeat. At the edge of my thoughts, the baby restless in my arms, the wind rising outside, carrying faint laughter like children playing where no children lived. I asked James why he buried that bracelet beneath the willow. He said because it was the only way to keep her quiet. I asked who she was. He whispered Evelyn, then louder the past, and slammed his hand against the wall, leaving a smear of red. He said, "I made a promise once that you would never remember, that you would live free of her shadow." I told him I am not free, I am half of a story torn apart. He said the doctors warned me when they stitched your memory back together, when they gave you a new name. He said you wanted to die with the child that night, but I could not lose you both, so I let them make you forget. I let them make you Eleana. The room tilted, the air too thick. I saw flashes, white lights, a table, a woman screaming, me screaming, hands pulling the baby away, voices saying she will not survive as she remembers. I stumbled backward, clutching the baby now warm against me, too real, too alive. I asked James who this child was. He said he found him at St. Mary's the week the storms began. Said a nice, begged him to take the boy and leave. Said the name on the tag was the same as before. The candle died, the house drowned in dark. The mirror upstairs glowed through the floor like a buried sun. I felt drawn to it. I climbed each step with the baby close, the light spilling down the walls in ripples. When I stood before it, I saw not my face, but Evelyn holding a child, the same mark, the same eyes. She looked at me and said, "He never died. You gave him away to save yourself. Now take him back." I reached out and the glass rippled like water. James shouted my name from below. The stairs groaned, the walls shook, but I did not move. The reflection stretched until it touched my hand, and for one heartbeat I felt her sadness pour through me, her voice a whisper inside my head saying, "Remember who you are." The mirror shattered, the shards scattering across the floor, each piece holding a fragment of another life, a wedding, a birth, a storm, a promise. And in the center, the baby, now silent, his eyes open wide, reflecting both of us, Evelyn and Eleana, together in one gaze. James rushed and fell to his knees, whispered, "I am sorry. I thought I could protect you. I thought lies could keep you safe." I knelt beside him. The baby between us said nothing because there were no words left, only the sound of truth breaking through the cracks. Outside, the wind stopped, the night still as prayer. I looked down at the baby and knew I was looking at the same child twice, the one I lost and the one I found, joined by the promise buried beneath my own name. Now the mirror is gone, the frame empty, but when I walk past that wall, I still see light flicker like a heartbeat and hear a voice soft and near saying, "You cannot bury love." After the mirror broke, the silence inside the house felt heavier than thunder. I walked through rooms that no longer felt mine, wallpaper curling like old skin. The air still smelled of rain and burning letters. James sat by the window staring at nothing, the baby asleep in a basket of woven willow, the same tree that once hid all our lies. I whispered to the walls, "Tell me what happened," and the walls whispered back through the cracks in my mind. I saw flashes of that night, a hospital, a storm, a nurse placing a child in my arms, then hands pulling him away. I heard James shouting my name, but his voice blurred with another deeper voice saying, "She must forget or she will not live." The sound cut through me like glass. James said the doctors called it survival, they called it mercy, but mercy built on lies is a curse. I told him, "You stole my memories." He said, "I stole your pain." He looked older than before, his hair lined with silver, his eyes filled with ghosts. I asked why Evelyn looked like me. He said, "Because she was you before the name, before the night." I held the baby close, his breath warm against my neck, and felt pieces of myself clicking back into place like keys turning in old locks. I said, "His name is Gabriel," and the moment I spoke it, the lights flickered and the house seemed to breathe. I realized it was the same name written on the tag, the same name that haunted my dreams for years. James whispered, "You chose that name once before. You chose it because it meant strength of God, and maybe you knew you would need it someday." He said, "Evelyn died that night, but Eleana was born from her ashes." He said, "I could not bury you, so I made you new." Outside, the willow bent low under the wind. I walked to it barefoot, the ground damp, the night heavy with scent of earth and rain. I dug with my hands until my fingers found the metal box. He once buried inside lay a small bracelet, a photograph burned at the edges, and a note in my handwriting. It said, "If you ever read this, it means I remembered. Tell him I forgive him." I felt the air change softer, calmer. I looked back and saw James in the doorway, tears cutting paths through dust. He said, "I should have told you sooner." I said, "We both lived in fear, and fear is another kind of death." He said, "What will you do now?" I said, "Raise him, tell him the truth no matter how it hurts." The house hummed, the floorboards warm like a pulse beneath my feet. I walked through each room, opening every curtain, letting moonlight touch the corners. Where secrets once slept, I felt Evelyn fading behind me, but not gone completely, like a shadow choosing to rest. I sat by the window holding Gabriel, watching dawn crawl up the horizon, a thin line of gold spreading across the sky. I told him once there was a woman who forgot herself to survive, but memory is stronger than time and love never dies even when names change. He smiled in his sleep, and I knew the curse had ended. When the first bird sang, I closed my eyes and said thank you, not to God, not to the past, but to the part of me that refused to vanish, that waited through all the darkness to return. In that moment, I understood truth is not always light. Sometimes it is the darkness that teaches us how to see. The promise buried in the rain. The morning after the truth broke open, the sky turned gray again, rain drumming soft against the roof like a heartbeat from far away. I stood on the porch holding Gabriel wrapped in a faded blanket, James beside me, his hand trembling as he held the doorframe, the house behind us breathing slow and old like it had finally exhaled its secrets. I looked out at the willow tree, its roots glistening in wet soil, the ground beneath it heavy with memories. I walked toward it, the grass cold against my bare feet, the rain soaking my dress. But I did not care. Gabriel stirred against my chest, his small fingers catching the fabric, as if he knew we had come to finish what began so long ago. James called my name, said, "The past is gone, Eleana, let it stay buried." I turned and said, "It is not the past that haunts us, it is what we left undone." He lowered his eyes, said, "Then do what you must." I knelt beneath the willow, placed Gabriel in the cradle of my lap, and whispered to the ground, "I remember everything now, the hospital, the mirror, the lie." I said, "I forgive you, Evelyn. I forgive you, James, the first forgive myself." And in that whisper, the rain softened, almost listening. The wind shifted warm and clean, carrying the scent of lilies from somewhere unseen. A small bird landed on a branch above us, shaking off droplets. It sang once clear and high, and I felt something inside me rise, a promise kept at last. I dug again until my fingers touched the box I had buried the night I chose to forget. I opened it and found the photo fully whole. Now no burns, no tears, just the three of us, Evelyn, James, and the child smiling at something beyond the frame. I held it to my heart, and the rain washed the ink into my skin like memory sealing itself inside me. James came closer, kneeling beside me, his hair wet, his eyes raw. He said, "Will you leave me?" I said, "I cannot leave what is already part of me. We are stitched by loss, but also by love." He said, "Then let us begin again." And I nodded, because sometimes beginnings are just endings that finally told the truth. We stayed there as the rain slowed, the willow dripping silver around us, the world quiet except for Gabriel's breathing steady and calm. I said, "He will grow without lies. He will know her story and mine. He will know that love is not the absence of pain, but the strength to walk through it." The clouds broke, sunlight spilling through like forgiveness, touching every broken piece of wood and stone until the house behind us looked almost new again. I walked back inside, the floors creaking in welcome, each room no longer hollow but full of air and light. That night I placed the old mirror frame on the mantel, empty now but glowing faintly in moonlight. James stood behind me and said, "It still watches." I said, "Maybe it remembers too, maybe it wants to see us live." I rocked Gabriel until he slept, his small hand curled around my finger. I whispered a promise into the dark. I will never hide again. I will never let love become fear. I will carry both names, Evelyn and Eleana, and I will keep them safe. Outside, the rain began again, gentle, endless, like the earth itself sighing in relief. Somewhere deep within that sound I heard a heartbeat, not mine, not James's, but the echo of all the nights that made us who we are, and I smiled because at last I understood the promise buried in the rain was not to forget, but to remember and still choose to love.